Question 1. Implementation of a new OpenSocial application feature that aggregates user activity across multiple connected social networks requires access to user profile information and recent posts. The development team is considering how to handle user data access and consent. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practices for developing OpenSocial applications? Option A. Access user data for the feature, but only use it for internal analytics and never display it directly to the user or other users. Option B. Collect user data without explicit consent, relying on the fact that the data is publicly visible on the respective social networks. Option C. Obtain explicit, informed consent from users detailing the specific types of data to be accessed and how it will be used for the feature, and ensure data is only accessed after consent is granted. Option D. Access all available user profile information and recent posts from connected networks by default, assuming users implicitly consent by connecting their accounts. Correct answer is C. Obtain explicit, informed consent from users detailing the specific types of data to be accessed and how it will be used for the feature, and ensure data is only accessed after consent is granted. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in developing OpenSocial applications, ensuring user data privacy and security while leveraging the platform's capabilities for personalized user experiences. The professional challenge lies in balancing the desire to provide rich, integrated features with the absolute necessity of adhering to data protection regulations and ethical best practices. Developers must navigate the complexities of data access, consent management, and secure storage, all within the specific legal and regulatory framework governing OpenSocial applications in the relevant jurisdiction. Failure to do so can lead to severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of user trust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes explicit user consent before accessing or processing any personal data. This aligns with the core principles of data protection regulations, which mandate transparency and user control over their information. By clearly informing users about what data will be accessed, why it is needed, and how it will be used, and then obtaining their affirmative consent, developers establish a legally sound and ethically responsible foundation for their application. This proactive approach minimizes the risk of unauthorized data access and demonstrates a commitment to user privacy, which is paramount in building trust and ensuring long-term application success. This directly reflects the spirit of data protection laws that emphasize informed consent as a cornerstone of lawful data processing. Incorrect approaches analysis. Accessing user data without explicit consent, even if the data is publicly available on the social network, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Many data protection frameworks, including those relevant to application development, consider even publicly available information as personal data that requires a lawful basis for processing, and consent is often the most appropriate basis when the processing goes beyond basic functionality. This approach violates the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, as data is collected without a clear, user-approved purpose. Assuming that because an OpenSocial application is integrated with a social platform, it has implicit permission to access all user data is another critical failure. Platforms often have layered permissions and specific APIs for data access, and bypassing these or misinterpreting their scope constitutes a breach of both platform terms of service and data protection laws. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the established security and privacy protocols. Using data collected for one purpose to inform features or analytics for an entirely different, undisclosed purpose, even if consent was initially obtained for a broader category of data, is a violation of purpose limitation. Data protection regulations require that data be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes, and not further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. This approach erodes user trust and can lead to legal challenges related to data misuse. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing OpenSocial applications should adopt a privacy by design and privacy by default approach. This involves integrating data protection considerations into the application development lifecycle from the outset. The decision-making process should always begin with a thorough understanding of the applicable data protection laws and platform-specific guidelines. When considering data access, developers must ask: 1. What specific user data is absolutely necessary for the application's core functionality? 2. What is the lawful basis for processing this data, e.g., consent, legitimate interest? 3. How will user consent be obtained, managed, and revoked? 4. How will the data be secured both in transit and at rest? 5. What are the data retention policies? 6. Are there any third-party integrations that might access this data, and what are their privacy practices? By systematically addressing these questions and prioritizing user consent and data minimization, developers can build compliant, ethical, and trustworthy OpenSocial applications. Question 2. The audit findings indicate that the OpenSocial application developed for a financial services client is accessing user profile information and transaction history without explicit, granular consent for each specific data access request. The application's current implementation relies on a general platform-level permission granted by the user during initial setup. Which of the following approaches best addresses these audit findings and ensures compliance with data privacy regulations? Option A. Remove all access to user profile information and transaction history from the application to eliminate any potential privacy concerns. Option B. Implement an application consent flow that clearly outlines the specific data points being accessed, e.g., name, email, transaction dates, amounts, and the purpose for accessing them, requiring explicit user opt-in before data is retrieved. Option C. Rely on the OpenSocial platform's default privacy settings, assuming they are sufficient for all data access scenarios. Option D. Update the application's documentation to state that all data accessed is covered by the platform's general terms of service, assuming user agreement. The correct answer is B. Implement an application consent flow that clearly outlines the specific data points being accessed, e.g., name, email, transaction dates, amounts, and the purpose for accessing them, requiring explicit user opt-in before data is retrieved. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the developer to balance the need for efficient application development with the critical requirement of adhering to specific data privacy regulations within the OpenSocial framework. The audit findings highlight a potential gap in how user data is being handled, which could lead to significant compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to identify the most appropriate technical and procedural solutions that satisfy both functional requirements and regulatory mandates. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves implementing a robust consent management mechanism directly within the OpenSocial application. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and user control, which are fundamental to many data privacy regulations. By obtaining explicit user consent before accessing or processing personal data, the application demonstrates a commitment to privacy by design and by default. This proactive measure ensures that data handling practices are transparent and compliant with the spirit and letter of relevant regulations, preventing unauthorized data access and potential breaches. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on the OpenSocial platform's default privacy settings without explicit application-level consent. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for informed consent, as users may not be aware of or agree to the specific data access requested by the application. It represents a failure in due diligence and a potential violation of user privacy rights. Another incorrect approach is to bypass the consent mechanism entirely, assuming that if a user has granted broad permissions to the OpenSocial platform, those permissions extend to all applications. This is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. Data privacy regulations typically require granular consent for specific data access and processing activities by individual applications, not blanket permissions. This approach risks unauthorized data access and misuse. A third incorrect approach is to implement a consent mechanism that is vague or misleading, making it difficult for users to understand what data is being accessed and why. This undermines the principle of informed consent and can be considered deceptive. Regulations often mandate clear and understandable consent requests, and a poorly designed mechanism fails to meet this standard, leading to potential legal and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first thoroughly understanding the specific data privacy regulations applicable to their operating jurisdiction and the OpenSocial framework. This involves identifying the core principles of data protection, such as consent, transparency, and data minimization. The next step is to evaluate technical solutions that can be integrated into the application to enforce these principles. This includes designing user interfaces for consent that are clear, concise, and easy to understand. Finally, ongoing monitoring and auditing of data handling practices are essential to ensure continued compliance and to adapt to any changes in regulations or platform policies. Question 3. The control framework reveals that a newly developed OpenSocial application requires access to a user's contact list to enable a Find Friends feature. The application's design currently includes code that automatically retrieves this information upon user login without any explicit prompt for permission. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of responsible data handling and platform compliance for developing this OpenSocial application? Option A. Store the entire retrieved contact list on the application's servers indefinitely for potential future features, even if not immediately required for the Find Friends functionality. Option B. Implement a clear, upfront consent dialog that explains precisely what data will be accessed, the contact list, and the specific purpose to find friends within the application, requiring an affirmative user action to grant permission before the data is retrieved. Option C. Proceed with the automatic retrieval of the contact list upon login, assuming that by using the application, users implicitly consent to all data access. Option D. Retrieve only a subset of the contact list, such as email addresses, without informing the user, as this is less sensitive than full contact details. The correct answer is B. Implement a clear, upfront consent dialog that explains precisely what data will be accessed, the contact list, and the specific purpose to find friends within the application, requiring an affirmative user action to grant permission before the data is retrieved. Explanation. The control framework reveals a common challenge in developing open social applications, ensuring that user data accessed through the application is handled in accordance with the platform's privacy policies and relevant data protection regulations. The professional challenge lies in balancing the functionality of the application with the imperative to protect user privacy and maintain trust. Developers must understand the scope of data they can access, how it can be used, and the mechanisms for obtaining user consent. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes user consent and adheres strictly to the OpenSocial platform's data access policies and any applicable data protection laws. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical data handling and regulatory compliance, which are foundational to building secure and trustworthy applications. By proactively seeking explicit consent and limiting data access to only what is necessary for the application's core functionality, the developer mitigates risks of privacy breaches and maintains user confidence. An incorrect approach that involves accessing user data without explicit consent or for purposes beyond what the user has agreed to constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This violates the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, which are central to most data protection frameworks. Such actions can lead to severe penalties, including fines, reputational damage, and loss of user trust. Another incorrect approach, such as storing sensitive user data unnecessarily or without adequate security measures, also presents regulatory and ethical risks. This failure to implement appropriate security safeguards can result in data breaches, exposing users to harm and violating data protection obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the OpenSocial platform's API documentation, privacy policies, and any relevant data protection regulations. Before implementing any feature that accesses user data, developers should assess the necessity of that data for the application's functionality. They must then design the application to request only the minimum data required and to clearly inform users about what data is being accessed and why. Implementing robust consent mechanisms and ensuring secure data handling practices are paramount. Regular review of data access practices against evolving regulations and platform policies is also crucial. Question 4. During the evaluation of an OpenSocial application's performance, a developer identifies several areas where response times are suboptimal. Considering the regulatory framework for C 2040-415, developing OpenSocial applications, which of the following strategies would best balance process optimization with adherence to data integrity and user experience standards? Option A. Focus on optimizing code sections that appear complex or are frequently accessed, even if profiling data does not indicate they are significant performance bottlenecks. Option B. Implement aggressive caching mechanisms across all data retrieval operations to minimize latency, without extensive testing of cache invalidation logic. Option C. Conduct thorough performance profiling to pinpoint specific bottlenecks, then implement targeted, incremental optimizations with continuous monitoring and validation against performance metrics and regulatory compliance checks. Option D. Bypass standard data validation routines in critical data processing modules to speed up execution, assuming data integrity can be maintained through other means. The correct answer is B. Implement aggressive caching mechanisms across all data retrieval operations to minimize latency, without extensive testing of cache invalidation logic. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in developing OpenSocial applications, optimizing process efficiency without compromising data integrity or user experience, all while adhering to the specific regulatory framework for C 2040-415, developing OpenSocial applications. The professional challenge lies in balancing the desire for faster application performance with the absolute requirement to maintain compliance with data handling and privacy guidelines inherent in the OpenSocial standard and its associated regulatory environment. This requires a nuanced understanding of how process optimization techniques can impact data flow and user interaction, and how these impacts align with the prescribed regulatory obligations. Correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, data-driven evaluation of optimization strategies. By first identifying bottlenecks through performance monitoring and then implementing targeted, incremental changes, developers can ensure that optimizations are effective and do not introduce unintended consequences. This aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on responsible development and data stewardship. Specifically, it upholds principles of data accuracy and user privacy by ensuring that optimization efforts do not inadvertently lead to data corruption, unauthorized access, or a degraded user experience, which could have regulatory implications. The iterative nature of this approach also allows for continuous validation against performance metrics and compliance checks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on aggressive caching, without considering cache invalidation strategies, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a potential regulatory breach related to data staleness and user trust. If cache data becomes outdated, users might make decisions based on inaccurate information, leading to potential financial or operational harm, and violating implicit or explicit data accuracy requirements within the regulatory framework. Another incorrect approach, such as prematurely optimizing code sections that are not performance bottlenecks, represents a waste of resources and a deviation from efficient development practices. While not a direct regulatory violation, it demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and an inability to prioritize tasks effectively, which can indirectly impact the overall compliance posture by diverting attention from critical areas. A third incorrect approach, implementing optimizations that bypass established data validation routines, would be a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This directly compromises data integrity, potentially leading to the storage of invalid or malformed data, which is a clear violation of data quality standards and could have significant legal ramifications under the governing framework. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the application's requirements and the specific regulatory obligations. This involves proactive performance monitoring to identify genuine bottlenecks. When considering optimization techniques, professionals must evaluate their potential impact on data integrity, security, and user experience, always cross-referencing these impacts against the established regulatory guidelines. A phased implementation with rigorous testing and validation at each stage is crucial. This iterative process ensures that optimizations are effective, compliant, and contribute to the overall robustness and trustworthiness of the OpenSocial application. Question 5. Investigation of a new OpenSocial application development team's approach to data privacy reveals that they plan to conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment, DPIA, only after the application has been fully developed and is ready for beta testing. Which of the following best describes the regulatory and ethical implications of this approach? Option A. This approach is acceptable as long as the DPIA identifies and addresses any privacy issues before the public launch. Option B. This approach represents a failure to adhere to privacy by design principles, potentially leading to significant regulatory noncompliance and increased remediation costs. Option C. This approach is sufficient because anonymizing data after collection will mitigate most privacy concerns. Option D. This approach is acceptable because the primary focus should be on rapid feature deployment to gain market share. The correct answer is A. This approach is acceptable as long as the DPIA identifies and addresses any privacy issues before the public launch. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing the rapid development of an open social application with the imperative to comply with data privacy regulations. Developers often face pressure to release features quickly, but overlooking regulatory requirements can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of user trust. The core challenge lies in integrating privacy by design principles into the development lifecycle without unduly hindering innovation or user experience. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks early in the development process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively embedding data privacy considerations throughout the application development lifecycle, aligning with the principles of privacy by design and privacy by default. This means conducting a thorough data protection impact assessment (DPIA) before significant data processing activities commence, identifying potential risks to user privacy, and implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to mitigate these risks. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate such assessments for high-risk processing activities and promote a proactive approach to data protection. By integrating privacy from the outset, the application is more likely to be compliant and trustworthy, representing best professional practice. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves delaying privacy reviews until after the application has been deployed. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it violates the principle of privacy by design. It means that potential privacy risks are not identified or addressed during the design and development phases, increasing the likelihood of noncompliance and data breaches. Such a delay can lead to costly remediation efforts and potential fines under data protection laws. Another incorrect approach is to assume that anonymizing data after collection is sufficient to meet all privacy obligations. Anonymization can be a useful technique. It may not always render data truly anonymous, especially when combined with other datasets. Furthermore, regulations often require more than just anonymization. They mandate lawful bases for processing, transparency with users, and mechanisms for data subject rights. Relying solely on post-collection anonymization without considering these broader requirements is a regulatory failure. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize feature development over user consent mechanisms. Obtaining valid, informed, and freely given consent is a cornerstone of many data protection regulations. If an application collects or processes personal data without adequate consent mechanisms in place from the beginning, it is a direct violation of these regulations. This not only exposes the organization to legal repercussions, but also erodes user trust. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing open social applications must adopt a proactive and risk-based approach to regulatory compliance. This involves understanding the specific data protection laws applicable to their target audience and the types of data being processed. A robust decision-making process should include 1. Early identification of data processing activities and the personal data involved. 2. Conducting a DPIA for any processing that poses a high risk to individuals' rights and freedoms. 3. Implementing privacy by design and privacy by default principles throughout the development lifecycle. 4. Establishing clear and transparent privacy policies and consent mechanisms. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating privacy practices in line with evolving regulations and technologies. This systematic approach ensures that compliance is an integral part of the development process, rather than an afterthought, thereby mitigating risks and fostering a culture of responsible data handling. Question 6. What factors determine the appropriate regulatory compliance strategy when developing open social applications, considering the specific data privacy and security laws applicable to the exam's jurisdiction? Option A. Focusing on user experience and engagement metrics, with regulatory compliance being addressed only if specific user complaints or inquiries arise. Option B, relying solely on the security measures provided by the OpenSocial platform and assuming they meet all regulatory requirements without independent verification. Option C, a comprehensive assessment of all applicable data privacy and security regulations, a thorough risk assessment of data handling processes, and the integration of privacy by design principles throughout the application lifecycle. Option D, prioritizing the rapid development of application features and functionalities, with a secondary consideration for regulatory compliance once the application is nearing launch. Correct answer is C, a comprehensive assessment of all applicable data privacy and security regulations, a thorough risk assessment of data handling processes, and the integration of privacy by design principles throughout the application lifecycle. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because developing open social applications requires adherence to specific data privacy and security regulations, which are paramount in protecting user information and maintaining trust. The developer must navigate the complexities of how user data is accessed, stored, and shared within the OpenSocial framework, ensuring compliance with the relevant regulatory framework for the exam's jurisdiction. Careful judgment is required to balance the functionality of the application with the stringent requirements of data protection laws. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding and implementation of the regulatory framework governing data privacy and security for open social applications. This involves proactively identifying all applicable regulations, conducting a comprehensive risk assessment of data handling practices, and embedding privacy by design principles into the application's architecture. This proactive and compliant approach minimizes the risk of data breaches, regulatory penalties, and reputational damage, thereby fostering user confidence and ensuring the long-term viability of the application. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on feature development without considering regulatory implications represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a disregard for user privacy and data protection laws, potentially leading to unauthorized data access, misuse, or breaches. This can result in severe legal consequences, including substantial fines and legal action, as well as a loss of user trust and damage to the developer's or organization's reputation. Another incorrect approach that involves assuming existing security measures are sufficient without independent verification is also professionally unacceptable. This assumption can lead to overlooking vulnerabilities and noncompliance with specific regulatory mandates. It fails to uphold the duty of care to protect user data and can result in regulatory violations and security incidents. Finally, an approach that delays addressing regulatory compliance until after the application is launched is a critical failure. This reactive stance increases the likelihood of discovering noncompliance issues late in the development cycle, leading to costly rework, potential legal liabilities, and a significant risk of regulatory sanctions. It demonstrates a lack of foresight and a failure to integrate compliance as a core aspect of the development process. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a phased approach. 1. Early identification and understanding of all relevant regulatory requirements. 2. Integration of compliance considerations into the initial design and architecture. 3. Continuous monitoring and testing for compliance throughout the development lifecycle. And 4. A commitment to ongoing review and adaptation as regulations evolve. This ensures that regulatory compliance is not an afterthought, but a fundamental component of responsible application development. Question 7. When evaluating the regulatory compliance requirements for developing an open social application that will handle user profile information and activity logs, which of the following approaches best ensures adherence to data protection principles and avoids potential legal ramifications? Option A. Proactively identifying all applicable data protection and privacy regulations, implementing robust security measures tailored to the application's data handling, and ensuring transparent user consent mechanisms are in place before deployment. Option B. Collecting all available user data deemed potentially useful for future feature development, with the intention of anonymizing it later if necessary, and addressing privacy concerns only if a user explicitly raises them. Option C. Deferring the detailed review of privacy policies and security protocols until after the application has been launched and is generating significant user engagement. Option D. Relying solely on the security measures provided by the OpenSocial platform, and assuming that user data will be adequately protected without further application-specific considerations. The correct answer is A. Proactively identifying all applicable data protection and privacy regulations, implementing robust security measures tailored to the application's data handling, and ensuring transparent user consent mechanisms are in place before deployment. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because developers of open social applications must navigate the complex landscape of data privacy and security regulations while building functional and engaging applications. The core tension lies in balancing user experience and data utility with the imperative to protect sensitive information and comply with legal mandates. Careful judgment is required to ensure that data collection, storage, and usage practices are not only technically sound, but also legally compliant and ethically responsible. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive and comprehensive understanding of relevant regulations, such as those governing data protection and privacy, in the context of application development. This involves conducting thorough due diligence to identify all applicable laws and guidelines, implementing robust security measures to safeguard user data, and ensuring transparent communication with users about data handling practices. This aligns with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and user consent, which are foundational to many data protection frameworks. By embedding compliance into the development lifecycle from the outset, developers mitigate risks of breaches, fines, and reputational damage, fostering user trust. An incorrect approach that involves collecting user data without a clear understanding of its necessity, or without obtaining explicit consent, fails to adhere to data protection principles. This can lead to violations of privacy laws, such as those requiring lawful basis for processing personal data and the right to be informed. Another incorrect approach, which is to assume that existing platform security measures are sufficient without implementing application-specific safeguards, neglects the developer's responsibility to protect data within their application's scope. This can result in vulnerabilities that are exploited, leading to data breaches and non-compliance with security obligations. Finally, an approach that delays addressing compliance until after an application is launched or a potential issue arises is reactive and significantly increases the risk of significant legal and financial repercussions, as well as damage to user trust. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of regulatory requirements relevant to the application's intended audience and data types. This should be followed by a risk-based approach to security, where potential vulnerabilities are identified and mitigated. Transparency with users regarding data collection and usage is paramount, and mechanisms for obtaining informed consent should be integrated. Continuous monitoring and updating of compliance strategies are essential as regulations and application functionalities evolve. Question 8. The performance metrics show a significant increase in user engagement with the new OpenSocial application, but also indicate a rise in reported data access requests that are not clearly aligned with standard user workflows. Given the application handles sensitive financial information, what is the most appropriate regulatory compliance approach to address this situation? Option A. Temporarily disable certain data access features that appear to be generating the most requests until a full security audit can be completed, without specific analysis of the current request patterns. Option B. Focus solely on optimizing the application's performance to handle the increased user engagement, assuming the data access requests are a natural consequence of higher usage and will resolve themselves with further development. Option C. Immediately implement enhanced logging and auditing mechanisms for all data access within the application, and conduct a thorough review of access logs to identify any anomalous patterns or unauthorized access attempts, while simultaneously initiating a review of the application's data handling protocols against relevant financial data protection regulations. Option D. Advise users to be more cautious with their data and provide a general disclaimer within the application's terms of service regarding data access, without undertaking a technical investigation or protocol review. The correct answer is C. Immediately implement enhanced logging and auditing mechanisms for all data access within the application, and conduct a thorough review of access logs to identify any anomalous patterns or unauthorized access attempts, while simultaneously initiating a review of the application's data handling protocols against relevant financial data protection regulations. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid application development and the stringent regulatory requirements governing financial data handling within the OpenSocial framework. Developers must balance the need for innovation and user experience with the imperative to protect sensitive information, as mandated by the relevant regulatory bodies. The core difficulty lies in ensuring that the application's design and implementation proactively address potential vulnerabilities without hindering functionality or introducing undue complexity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive, risk-based methodology aligned with the principles of data privacy and security. By embedding security and compliance considerations from the initial design phase, developers ensure that regulatory mandates are not an afterthought but an integral part of the application's architecture. This aligns with the spirit of regulations that emphasize privacy by design and security by design, which are fundamental to responsible open social application development in regulated environments. This approach minimizes the likelihood of costly remediation efforts and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on feature development without adequate security vetting fails to meet regulatory obligations. This oversight can lead to breaches of data privacy, violating regulations that stipulate how user data must be collected, stored, and processed. Such a failure exposes the organization to significant fines, legal action, and loss of user trust. Another incorrect approach that relies on post-development security audits as the primary means of compliance is also professionally unacceptable. While audits are important, they are reactive. Waiting for an audit to identify vulnerabilities means that the application has already been deployed with potential risks, increasing the chance of a security incident. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to implement robust internal controls, which are often explicit requirements in regulatory frameworks. A third incorrect approach that attempts to circumvent or interpret regulatory requirements loosely is ethically and legally unsound. This demonstrates a disregard for the law and the protection of users. Such actions can result in severe penalties, including the revocation of operating licenses and criminal charges, in addition to significant reputational damage. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory framework, such as those governing financial services or personal data protection within the context of open social applications. This understanding should inform a risk assessment process that identifies potential vulnerabilities and compliance gaps. A layered security strategy, incorporating secure coding practices, data encryption, access controls, and regular security testing should be implemented. Furthermore, continuous monitoring and a commitment to ongoing compliance training for development teams are essential to maintaining a secure and compliant open social application ecosystem. Question 9. The assessment process reveals that a developer is building an open social application that will access and process user profile information and activity logs. The developer is unsure about the specific regulatory requirements for handling this type of data within the jurisdiction governing the application's deployment. Which of the following actions demonstrates the most responsible and compliant approach to address this uncertainty? Option A. Proceed with development, assuming that the standard security features provided by the open social platform are sufficient to meet all regulatory obligations. Option B. Focus solely on the application's functionality and user experience, with the intention of researching and implementing any necessary regulatory measures only if specifically requested by users or authorities. Option C. Proactively consult the relevant data protection laws and guidelines for the specified jurisdiction and integrate their requirements into the application's design and development from the initial stages. Option D. Delay addressing regulatory compliance until after the application has been launched and any potential issues are identified by users or regulatory bodies. The correct answer is C. Proactively consult the relevant data protection laws and guidelines for the specified jurisdiction and integrate their requirements into the application's design and development from the initial stages. Explanation: The assessment process reveals a common challenge in developing open social applications, ensuring that user data is handled in a manner that strictly adheres to the regulatory framework governing data privacy and application development within the specified jurisdiction. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a developer to balance the functionality and user experience of an open social application with the imperative to protect sensitive user information. Failure to do so can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of user trust. Careful judgment is required to interpret and apply the relevant regulations to the specific context of an open social application's data flows and storage mechanisms. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive and comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape. By conducting a thorough review of the applicable data protection laws and guidelines before and during development, the developer ensures that the application is designed with compliance as a core principle. This includes implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to safeguard user data, obtaining necessary consents, and providing clear and transparent privacy policies. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect users and the legal requirement to comply with data protection statutes. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with development without a clear understanding of regulatory requirements is professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and ethical responsibilities, potentially leading to the collection, storage, or processing of user data in violation of privacy laws. Such a failure could result in substantial fines, legal action, and the forced discontinuation of the application. Another incorrect approach, such as assuming that OpenSocial's inherent security features are sufficient to meet all regulatory obligations, is also professionally unsound. While OpenSocial may offer certain security protocols, these are generally not a substitute for a comprehensive compliance strategy tailored to the specific data being handled and the jurisdiction's laws. Relying solely on platform-level security without independent verification and implementation of specific compliance measures is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. A further incorrect approach, which is to only address regulatory compliance after an issue arises, represents a reactive and irresponsible stance. This approach not only increases the risk of non-compliance, but also indicates a lack of foresight and commitment to user data protection. Addressing compliance reactively often leads to costly remediation efforts and can still result in penalties for past violations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to compliance. This includes 1. Identifying all applicable regulations and guidelines relevant to the application's functionality and the data it will handle. 2. Conducting a data privacy impact assessment to understand potential risks. 3. Integrating compliance requirements into the application's design and development lifecycle from the outset. 4. Implementing robust data security measures and access controls. 5. Establishing clear procedures for data handling, consent management, and incident response. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating compliance practices in response to evolving regulations and application changes. Question 10. Strategic planning requires that when developing an open social application intended for use within the European Union, which of the following approaches to data privacy compliance is most critical to implement from the project's inception? Option A. Including a general statement in the application's terms of service that users consent to data processing, without specific details on how data is handled or protected under GDPR. Option B. Relying on the default privacy settings provided by the OpenSocial platform and assuming they meet all GDPR requirements for user data protection. Option C. Developing the application first and then retrofitting privacy controls as needed, prioritizing feature delivery over immediate compliance with GDPR. Option D. Implementing robust data anonymization techniques for all user data collected, ensuring alignment with GDPR principles, and conducting regular privacy impact assessments throughout the development lifecycle. Correct answer is D. Implementing robust data anonymization techniques for all user data collected, ensuring alignment with GDPR principles, and conducting regular privacy impact assessments throughout the development lifecycle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. Developing open social applications involves integrating with various platforms and potentially handling sensitive user data. A key challenge arises when an application needs to access data or functionality that falls under specific regulatory requirements, such as those governing data privacy or financial transactions. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the application's design and implementation strictly adhere to these regulations without compromising its core functionality or user experience. Misinterpreting or overlooking these requirements can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of user trust. The need for absolute priority of regulatory compliance means that any development decision must first and foremost consider its legal and ethical implications within the defined jurisdiction. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough understanding and integration of the relevant regulatory framework from the outset of the development lifecycle. This involves proactively identifying all applicable laws and guidelines governing the data and functionalities the OpenSocial application will interact with. For example, if the application handles personal identifiable information, PI, compliance with data protection regulations is paramount. Best professional practice dictates that developers should consult legal counsel or compliance officers early in the process to ensure the application's architecture and data handling procedures are designed to meet these obligations. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of costly retrofits or legal breaches. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical development and responsible data stewardship, which are foundational to building trust with users and stakeholders. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that standard development practices are sufficient and to address regulatory compliance only if explicitly prompted or after an issue arises. This is a failure to adhere to the principle of absolute priority for regulatory requirements. It represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure because it places functionality and speed of development above legal obligations, potentially exposing the organization to fines and legal action for noncompliance with data privacy laws or other relevant statutes. Another incorrect approach is to implement compliance measures superficially, such as adding a generic privacy disclaimer without fundamentally altering data handling processes. This approach is ethically questionable and legally insufficient. It creates a false sense of security and does not genuinely protect user data or meet the spirit of regulatory intent. Such a practice can be seen as misleading to users and regulators, leading to severe penalties if discovered. A third incorrect approach involves relying solely on the OpenSocial platform's built-in security features without independently verifying their compliance with the specific jurisdictional regulations. While platform features can be helpful, they may not cover all nuances of local laws. This reliance is a regulatory failure as it outsources the responsibility for compliance without due diligence, potentially leading to gaps in protection and violations of specific jurisdictional mandates. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing OpenSocial applications must adopt a risk-based approach to regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Proactive identification. Continuously identify all applicable regulations based on the application's functionality and the jurisdictions it will operate in. 2. Risk assessment. Evaluate the potential impact of noncompliance for each identified regulation. 3. Integration into design. Embed compliance requirements into the application's architecture and development processes from the earliest stages. 4. Continuous monitoring. Regularly review and update compliance measures as regulations evolve or application functionality changes. 5. Expert consultation. Seek guidance from legal and compliance experts when in doubt. This systematic process ensures that regulatory adherence is not an afterthought but an integral part of the development lifecycle, safeguarding both the organization and its users. Question 11. Benchmark analysis indicates that a new OpenSocial application is being developed with a tight deadline. The development team is considering skipping a formal risk assessment phase to expedite the launch. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework for developing OpenSocial applications and professional best practices? Option A. Deploy the application and rely on user feedback to identify and address any security or privacy concerns that arise. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential security, privacy, and operational risks and integrate mitigation strategies into the development plan before deployment. Option C. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to a separate compliance team, with minimal developer involvement to maintain development focus. Option D. Proceed with the application launch immediately and conduct a security audit only after the application has been live for 3 months. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential security, privacy, and operational risks, and integrate mitigation strategies into the development plan before deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid application development and the need for robust risk assessment in the context of open social applications. Developers must balance the desire for feature velocity with the imperative to identify and mitigate potential security, privacy, and operational risks before deployment. The regulatory framework for developing open social applications, as defined by the C2040-415 exam, mandates a proactive approach to risk management. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it integrates risk assessment as a continuous and iterative process throughout the application development lifecycle. This aligns with the principles of secure development and data protection, which are implicitly or explicitly required by the regulatory guidelines governing open social applications. By proactively identifying potential vulnerabilities, data leakage points, and compliance issues early on, developers can implement appropriate controls and design choices, thereby minimizing the likelihood of adverse events and ensuring adherence to established standards. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining user trust and avoiding regulatory scrutiny. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate deployment without a thorough risk assessment fails to meet professional standards and regulatory expectations. This oversight can lead to significant security breaches, privacy violations, and non-compliance with data handling regulations, resulting in reputational damage and potential legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on post-deployment security audits is also professionally deficient. While audits are valuable, they are reactive rather than preventative. Waiting for issues to be discovered after an application is live increases the potential impact of any identified risks and suggests a lack of due diligence during the development phase. Finally, an approach that delegates risk assessment entirely to a separate team without developer involvement can lead to a disconnect between technical implementation and risk mitigation strategies, potentially resulting in solutions that are technically sound but fail to address the identified risks effectively. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes a risk-aware development process. This involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to open social applications, identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities at each stage of development, evaluating the likelihood and impact of these risks, and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies. Continuous monitoring and reassessment of risks throughout the application's lifecycle are also critical components of this framework. Question 12. Compliance review shows that a new feature for the open social application will integrate with several external social media platforms to allow users to share application-generated content. The development team proposes to proceed with deployment after a brief internal discussion about potential security concerns. What is the most appropriate risk assessment approach to ensure compliance and protect user data? Option A. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to the external social media platforms, trusting their internal security evaluations to cover the integrated feature. Option B. Rely on the existing security protocols of the integrated external platforms to safeguard user data, assuming they have robust security measures in place. Option C. Perform a quick, informal review of the feature's functionality to ensure it meets user requirements, with security being a secondary consideration addressed only if issues arise post-deployment. Option D. Conduct a formal, documented risk assessment that identifies potential threats to user data confidentiality, integrity, and availability, analyzes their likelihood and impact, and outlines mitigation strategies before deployment. The correct answer is D. Conduct a formal, documented risk assessment that identifies potential threats to user data confidentiality, integrity, and availability, analyzes their likelihood and impact, and outlines mitigation strategies before deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in the context of developing open social applications by requiring a proactive risk assessment for a new feature. The challenge lies in balancing innovation and user experience with the imperative to protect sensitive user data and maintain compliance with relevant regulations. Developers must anticipate potential vulnerabilities and their impact before deployment, which demands a thorough understanding of the application's architecture, data flows, and the regulatory landscape governing data privacy and security. The integration of third-party components further complicates this, introducing external dependencies and potential unknown risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential threats to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of user data. This includes considering the likelihood of a threat occurring and the potential impact if it does. For open social applications, this would involve scrutinizing the data accessed by the new feature, the security of the APIs used, the potential for data leakage through social interactions, and the compliance of any third-party libraries with data protection principles. This proactive, documented approach ensures that mitigation strategies can be implemented before the feature is released, aligning with the principle of security by design and demonstrating due diligence in protecting user information, which is a core tenet of data privacy regulations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with deployment without a formal risk assessment, relying solely on the assumption that existing security measures are sufficient. This fails to acknowledge that new features can introduce novel vulnerabilities. It represents a significant regulatory failure by neglecting the obligation to protect user data and a breach of ethical responsibility to users. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial assessment that only considers obvious threats, such as direct data breaches, while overlooking more subtle risks like indirect data exposure through aggregated information or unintended sharing. This approach is inadequate as it does not fulfill the requirement for a thorough and systematic evaluation of all potential risks, leaving the application vulnerable to less apparent but equally damaging security incidents. This can lead to non-compliance with regulations that mandate comprehensive data protection measures. A third incorrect approach is to delegate the entire risk assessment to a third-party vendor without independent verification or oversight. While third-party expertise can be valuable, the ultimate responsibility for data protection and regulatory compliance rests with the application developer. This abdication of responsibility can lead to overlooked risks specific to the open social environment or the application's unique implementation, resulting in regulatory noncompliance and ethical breaches. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured and iterative risk assessment process. This begins with clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all assets, including user data, potential threats, and vulnerabilities. For each identified risk, the likelihood and impact should be estimated. Based on this analysis, appropriate mitigation strategies should be developed and prioritized. The process should be documented thoroughly, and the assessment should be revisited periodically, especially after significant changes to the application or its environment. This systematic approach ensures that risks are managed effectively, regulatory obligations are met, and user trust is maintained. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a newly developed open social application, designed to aggregate user data from multiple social platforms, has a potential vulnerability related to cross-site scripting (XSS) due to improper sanitization of user-generated content. Which of the following approaches best addresses this identified risk in a timely and compliant manner? Option A. Immediately deploy the application to gather real-world usage data and plan to address any reported XSS incidents as they arise. Option B. Conduct a thorough code review focusing on all input validation and output encoding mechanisms and implement necessary fixes before deployment. Option C. Rely on the underlying social platform's security measures to inherently protect against XSS attacks targeting the open social application. Option D. Document the XSS vulnerability in the application's known issues list and proceed with deployment, assuming the risk is low given the limited user base initially. The correct answer is A. Immediately deploy the application to gather real-world usage data and plan to address any reported XSS incidents as they arise. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for rapid development and deployment of an open social application with the imperative to identify and mitigate potential risks. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts in the risk assessment process, potentially exposing the application and its users to security vulnerabilities, data breaches, or compliance failures. The complexity of open social applications, which often integrate with multiple platforms and handle sensitive user data, amplifies these risks. Therefore, a thorough and systematic approach to risk assessment is crucial, demanding careful judgment to ensure that the identified risks are adequately addressed without unduly hindering innovation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and iterative risk assessment process that begins early in the development lifecycle and continues throughout. This includes identifying potential threats, e.g., unauthorized access, data leakage, injection attacks, vulnerabilities, e.g., insecure coding practices, inadequate authentication mechanisms, and the potential impact of these risks on the application, its users, and the organization. This approach aligns with best professional practices by embedding security and compliance considerations from the outset, fostering a security by design mentality. It ensures that risks are understood and managed in a structured manner, leading to more robust and trustworthy applications. This aligns with the general principles of responsible software development and data protection, which are implicitly expected within any regulatory framework governing application development and deployment, even if specific regulations for C 2040-415 are not explicitly detailed here. The focus is on anticipating and preventing issues rather than reacting to them. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to defer the comprehensive risk assessment until after the application has been deployed. This represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it prioritizes speed over safety and compliance. It increases the likelihood of deploying an application with unaddressed vulnerabilities, potentially leading to data breaches, privacy violations, and reputational damage. Such a delay also makes remediation more costly and complex. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial risk assessment that only considers obvious or well-known threats, neglecting less common but potentially severe risks. This is professionally unacceptable as it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adequately protect users and the organization. It can lead to unforeseen security incidents and non-compliance with implicit or explicit data protection standards. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on automated scanning tools without human oversight or contextual analysis. While automated tools are valuable, they cannot fully grasp the nuances of an application's architecture, its intended use, or the specific regulatory landscape. This can result in missed risks or false positives, leading to either inadequate mitigation or wasted resources. Ethically, it fails to provide the comprehensive assurance required for a secure and compliant application. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to open social application development. This involves 1. Early and continuous identification. Integrate risk identification into every phase of the development lifecycle, from initial design to post-deployment monitoring. 2. Comprehensive threat and vulnerability analysis. Systematically identify potential threats and vulnerabilities specific to the open social environment and the application's functionality. 3. Impact assessment. Evaluate the potential consequences of identified risks on users, data, and the organization. 4. Prioritization and mitigation. Prioritize risks based on their likelihood and impact, and develop appropriate mitigation strategies. 5. Documentation and review. Maintain thorough documentation of the risk assessment process and its outcomes, and conduct regular reviews and updates. This structured process ensures that risks are managed proactively, leading to the development of secure, compliant, and reliable open social applications. Question 14. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of unauthorized access to user profile data due to the integration of new social sharing features in an open social application. Which of the following development approaches best addresses this identified risk within the regulatory framework? Option A. Document the potential risk of unauthorized access, but defer any mitigation efforts until user feedback indicates a problem with data security. Option B. Focus on optimizing the performance and user experience of the new social sharing features, assuming that existing security measures will adequately protect user data. Option C. Proceed with the deployment of the new social sharing features as planned. and address any security incidents related to user data access after they occur. Option D. Implement robust access controls and encryption for the user profile data, and conduct a thorough security audit of the new social sharing features code before deployment. The correct answer is D. Implement robust access controls and encryption for the user profile data, and conduct a thorough security audit of the new social sharing features code before deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the rapid deployment of new features in an open social application with the imperative to protect user data and maintain application integrity, all within the context of the specific regulatory framework governing the exam's jurisdiction. The pressure to innovate and deliver value quickly can sometimes lead to overlooking potential security vulnerabilities or privacy concerns during the development lifecycle. A robust risk assessment process is crucial to identify, analyze, and mitigate these potential threats before they materialize into actual incidents. A correct approach, which involves proactively identifying potential risks associated with the new social features and their integration with existing data stores, and then developing specific mitigation strategies before deployment, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of secure development and data privacy mandated by the regulatory framework. By conducting a thorough risk assessment early in the development cycle, developers can ensure that security and privacy are built into the application from the ground up, rather than being an afterthought. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of data breaches, unauthorized access, and non-compliance with regulatory requirements, thereby safeguarding user trust and the organization's reputation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the functional requirements of the new features, without considering their security implications, would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This oversight could lead to vulnerabilities that expose sensitive user data, violating privacy regulations, and potentially resulting in substantial fines and legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach, which delays risk assessment until after the application has been deployed and issues have already arisen, is equally problematic. This reactive stance is inefficient, costly, and demonstrates a disregard for due diligence and risk management principles. It fails to meet the expected standard of care in application development and exposes the organization to unnecessary risks. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment as an integral part of the development process. This involves establishing clear risk assessment protocols, integrating them into the project timeline, and ensuring that all team members are aware of their responsibilities in identifying and reporting potential risks. When faced with competing priorities, professionals must advocate for the necessary time and resources to conduct thorough risk assessments, emphasizing the long-term benefits of preventing issues over the short-term gains of rapid, unchecked deployment. This systematic approach ensures that applications are not only functional, but also secure, compliant, and trustworthy. Question 15. Quality control measures reveal that a new set of OpenSocial application features, designed to enhance user collaboration, has been developed under significant time pressure. To expedite the release, the development team has proposed skipping a detailed, proactive risk assessment, opting instead to address any issues that arise post-deployment. Which approach to risk assessment best upholds professional standards and regulatory expectations for developing such applications? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential vulnerabilities, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and defines mitigation strategies before deployment, even if it requires a slight adjustment to the release timeline. Option B. Perform a cursory review of the code for obvious security flaws, assuming that any deeper issues will be discovered and fixed by users or through post-deployment monitoring. Option C. Defer the entire risk assessment process until after the application has been fully deployed and is in production use. Option D. Rely exclusively on automated security scanning tools to identify risks, without any manual review or expert judgment of the findings. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential vulnerabilities, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and defines mitigation strategies before deployment, even if it requires a slight adjustment to the release timeline. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge where a developer must balance the need for rapid deployment of new features with the imperative to conduct thorough risk assessments. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts in the risk assessment process, potentially exposing the application and its users to unforeseen vulnerabilities. The core challenge lies in ensuring that risk assessment is not treated as a mere formality, but as an integral part of the development lifecycle, even under time constraints. This requires a proactive and systematic approach to identifying, analyzing, and mitigating potential risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves integrating a comprehensive risk assessment framework into the development pipeline, even when facing tight deadlines. This means identifying potential risks associated with the new OpenSocial application features, such as data privacy breaches, unauthorized access, or performance degradation. It requires evaluating the likelihood and impact of these risks, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with best professional practices by prioritizing security and user protection, which are fundamental ethical obligations for developers. Furthermore, adhering to established risk management methodologies ensures compliance with any applicable regulatory frameworks that mandate such assessments for software development, even if not explicitly detailed in the C2040-415 syllabus itself, as the underlying principles of secure development are universally expected. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to defer the risk assessment until after the application has been deployed. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it exposes users and the organization to risks that could have been identified and addressed proactively. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for potential harm, which can lead to severe consequences, including data breaches, reputational damage, and legal liabilities. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial risk assessment that only considers obvious threats, neglecting more subtle or emergent risks. This is professionally unacceptable, as it fails to provide a robust understanding of the application's security posture. It can lead to the overlooking of critical vulnerabilities, leaving the application susceptible to attack and violating the implicit trust placed in developers to build secure and reliable software. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on automated tools for risk assessment, without human oversight and expert judgment. While automated tools are valuable, they cannot fully capture the nuances of a specific application's context, potential misuse scenarios, or the evolving threat landscape. This approach risks missing critical risks that require human insight and strategic thinking, thus failing to meet the professional standard of care expected in software development. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to development. This involves understanding the potential impact of risks on users, the organization, and the application itself. When faced with time pressures, the decision-making process should prioritize identifying high-impact risks and implementing immediate mitigation strategies, even if a full, exhaustive assessment cannot be completed before deployment. This might involve phased rollouts, enhanced monitoring, or contingency planning. The key is to maintain a continuous cycle of risk identification, assessment, and mitigation throughout the application's lifecycle, rather than treating it as a one-time event. This proactive stance ensures that security and integrity are embedded in the development process, fostering trust and minimizing potential harm. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates that the development team for new OpenSocial application is under significant pressure to meet aggressive launch deadlines. To accelerate development, the team is considering integrating several third-party OpenSocial gadgets without conducting a formal, in-depth risk assessment for each component. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for rapid development with responsible risk management? Option A. Conduct a streamlined risk assessment focused on critical security vulnerabilities and data privacy implications for each third-party gadget before integration, prioritizing those with access to sensitive user data. Option B. Proceed with integrating all third-party gadgets immediately to meet the deadline, deferring any risk assessment to a post-launch maintenance phase. Option C. Integrate only those third-party gadgets that are open source, assuming that the community has already identified and addressed all potential risks. Option D. Rely solely on the documentation provided by the third-party gadget vendors to confirm their security and privacy compliance, assuming their claims are accurate. The correct answer is A. Conduct a streamlined risk assessment focused on critical security vulnerabilities and data privacy implications for each third-party gadget before integration, prioritizing those with access to sensitive user data. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for rapid application development and deployment with robust risk assessment, core tenet of responsible software engineering and compliance. The pressure to deliver features quickly can lead to shortcuts in identifying and mitigating potential security vulnerabilities or data privacy issues inherent in integrating third-party OpenSocial components. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the risk assessment process is thorough and integrated into the development lifecycle, rather than being an afterthought. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it embeds risk assessment as a continuous activity throughout the development lifecycle. By proactively identifying potential risks associated with third-party OpenSocial components, such as data leakage, unauthorized access, or noncompliance with data handling policies, developers can implement appropriate controls and mitigation strategies early on. This aligns with the principles of secure development and data protection, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by various regulatory frameworks governing software development and data handling, even if not explicitly detailed in the C2040-415 syllabus itself. The underlying principles of responsible development and risk management are universal. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate deployment without a comprehensive risk assessment fails to uphold professional responsibility. This oversight can lead to significant regulatory and ethical failures. For instance, if a third-party OpenSocial component has a known vulnerability that is not identified and addressed, it could result in a data breach, violating data protection regulations and eroding user trust. Another failure would be integrating components that do not adhere to privacy by design principles, leading to potential violations of user consent and data minimization requirements. Furthermore, neglecting to assess the security posture of third-party code introduces supply chain risks, which are increasingly scrutinized by regulatory bodies. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This framework should include steps for risk identification e.g., through code reviews, vulnerability scanning and vendor due diligence, risk analysis e.g., assessing the likelihood and impact of identified risks, risk evaluation e.g., prioritizing risks based on severity, and risk treatment e.g., implementing controls, accepting risks, or transferring them. Developers should always advocate for sufficient time and resources to conduct thorough risk assessments and ensure that mitigation strategies are implemented before deployment, fostering a culture of security and compliance. Question 17. Quality control measures reveal a potential security vulnerability in a newly developed OpenSocial application that could expose sensitive user profile information. The development team is under pressure to meet a tight release deadline for a new feature set integrated with this application. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Proceed with the deployment as scheduled, assuming the vulnerability is minor and unlikely to be exploited, to meet the release deadline. Option B. Halt all further development and deployment of the application indefinitely until a perfect, zero-risk solution can be guaranteed. Option C. Implement a quick, superficial patch for the identified vulnerability without a full risk assessment to avoid delaying the release. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to quantify the likelihood and impact of the vulnerability, and then develop and prioritize a remediation plan before proceeding with deployment. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to quantify the likelihood and impact of the vulnerability, and then develop and prioritize a remediation plan before proceeding with deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the development team has identified a potential security vulnerability in an OpenSocial application that could impact user data privacy. The challenge lies in balancing the need for rapid deployment of new features with the imperative to protect sensitive information and comply with relevant regulations. A hasty decision could lead to significant reputational damage, regulatory penalties, and loss of user trust. Careful judgment is required to assess the risk accurately and implement appropriate mitigation strategies. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment that quantifies the likelihood and impact of the identified vulnerability. This assessment should consider the sensitivity of the data potentially exposed, the number of users affected, and the potential for malicious exploitation. Based on this assessment, a prioritized remediation plan should be developed, focusing on the most critical risks first. This aligns with best professional practices by demonstrating due diligence, a commitment to data security, and adherence to principles of responsible software development. It also implicitly supports regulatory compliance by proactively addressing potential breaches and safeguarding user data, which is a core tenet of data protection frameworks. Incorrect approaches analysis. Ignoring the vulnerability and proceeding with the deployment is a direct violation of professional ethics and regulatory requirements. It demonstrates a disregard for user privacy and security, potentially leading to data breaches that would incur severe penalties under data protection laws. This approach prioritizes speed over safety, which is never acceptable when sensitive data is involved. Implementing a superficial fix without a comprehensive risk assessment is also professionally unacceptable. While it may appear to address the immediate concern, it fails to account for potential cascading effects or other related vulnerabilities. This superficial approach risks leaving the application exposed to further exploitation, undermining the integrity of the security measures and potentially violating regulatory obligations to implement robust security. Delaying the deployment indefinitely without a clear plan for remediation is inefficient and hinders innovation. While caution is necessary, an indefinite delay without a structured approach to resolving the vulnerability is not a sustainable or professional solution. It can lead to missed business opportunities and a lack of responsiveness to market demands, but more importantly, it fails to actively manage and mitigate the identified risk in a timely and effective manner, which is a regulatory expectation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured risk management framework. This involves 1. Identification of the risk, the vulnerability. 2. Assessment of the risk, likelihood, and impact. 3. Evaluation of the risk, prioritization based on assessment. 4. Treatment of the risk, developing and implementing mitigation strategies. 5. Monitoring and review of the risk. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are data-driven, compliant with regulations, and ethically sound, prioritizing the protection of users and the integrity of the application. Question 18. System analysis indicates that a new OpenSocial application is being developed to facilitate social interactions and data sharing among users. The development team is under pressure to launch quickly. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment best aligns with regulatory frameworks and professional best practices for developing such applications? Option A. Rely exclusively on automated security scanning tools to identify and address all potential risks without manual review or contextual analysis. Option B. Defer the primary risk assessment until after the application has been fully developed and deployed to the production environment. Option C. Perform a superficial risk assessment that only addresses the most apparent and common security threats, assuming less common threats are negligible. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that begins during the design phase, identifying potential threats, analyzing their impact, and defining mitigation strategies before deployment, with ongoing reviews. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that begins during the design phase, identifying potential threats, analyzing their impact, and defining mitigation strategies before deployment, with ongoing reviews. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid application development and robust risk assessment. The pressure to deliver new features quickly can lead to shortcuts in evaluating potential security vulnerabilities and compliance issues. Developers must balance the need for innovation with the imperative to protect user data and adhere to regulatory requirements, which are paramount in the context of developing open social applications. The complexity arises from the interconnectedness of applications, user data, and the platform itself, meaning a single oversight can have far-reaching consequences. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and integrated risk assessment process that begins early in the development lifecycle and continues throughout. This aligns with best practices for secure software development and regulatory compliance. Specifically, for open social applications, this means understanding the data access patterns, potential for cross-site scripting XSS, or other injection attacks, and ensuring compliance with data privacy regulations relevant to the target user base. A thorough risk assessment identifies potential threats, analyzes their likelihood and impact, and defines mitigation strategies. This systematic approach ensures that security and compliance are not afterthoughts, but are built into the application's design, thereby minimizing the likelihood of breaches and regulatory penalties. It reflects a commitment to responsible development and user protection. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to defer risk assessment until after the application has been deployed. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it exposes users and the platform to risks during the development and testing phases. It violates the principle of security by design and can lead to data breaches or compliance violations that are far more costly and damaging to remediate post-deployment. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on automated security scans without human oversight or contextual understanding. While automated tools are valuable, they may not identify all nuanced vulnerabilities or understand the specific business logic and data flows of an open social application, leading to a false sense of security. This can result in missed risks that could be exploited. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial risk assessment that only addresses the most obvious threats, neglecting less apparent but potentially severe risks such as social engineering vulnerabilities or subtle data leakage. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to meet the professional standard of care required for developing applications that handle user data. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach that integrates security and compliance considerations from the initial design phase. This involves 1. Threat modeling, understanding the application's architecture, data flows, and potential attack vectors. 2. Vulnerability assessment, identifying known and potential weaknesses. 3. Impact analysis, evaluating the potential consequences of identified risks. 4. Mitigation planning, developing and implementing controls to reduce risks to an acceptable level. 5. Continuous monitoring, regularly reviewing and updating risk assessments as the application evolves and the threat landscape changes. This iterative process ensures that risk management is an ongoing activity, not a one-time event, fostering a culture of security and compliance. Question 19. Market research demonstrates that users are increasingly concerned about the security and privacy of their data within social applications. When developing a new open social application, which approach best aligns with professional best practices for ensuring user trust and application integrity? Option A. Implement comprehensive security audits, robust data validation, and secure coding practices from the initial development stages. Option B. Rely solely on the inherent security features of the open social platform without any additional developer-side security measures. Option C. Focus on creating visually appealing interfaces and engaging user experiences, assuming the underlying platform handles all security requirements. Option D. Prioritize rapid feature deployment and user acquisition, addressing security concerns only if they become critical issues after launch. The correct answer is D. Prioritize rapid feature deployment and user acquisition, addressing security concerns only if they become critical issues after launch. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the rapid evolution of open social application development with the need for robust, secure, and compliant practices. Developers must anticipate potential vulnerabilities and ensure that their applications adhere to the underlying principles of open social, which often involve data privacy and user consent, even when not explicitly mandated by a specific regulation for this exam. The challenge lies in proactively implementing best practices that safeguard user data and maintain application integrity, rather than reacting to breaches or compliance issues after they arise. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive, security-first mindset. By conducting thorough security audits and implementing robust data validation mechanisms, developers ensure that the open social application is built on a foundation of trust and reliability. This aligns with the implicit ethical obligations of developing applications that handle user information and the general expectation of secure software. Adhering to the principles of secure coding and data handling, even in the absence of explicit, granular regulations for this specific exam context, demonstrates professional responsibility and foresight. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on meeting the minimum functional requirements without considering security implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for potential data breaches and unauthorized access, which can lead to significant reputational damage and loss of user trust. Another incorrect approach that neglects to implement proper input sanitization and output encoding exposes the application to common web vulnerabilities, such as cross-site scripting, XSS, and SQL injection. This is a direct failure to uphold basic security principles and can have severe consequences for users and the platform. Finally, an approach that bypasses or inadequately implements user consent mechanisms, even if the specific OpenSocial framework for this exam doesn't detail explicit consent requirements, violates the ethical principle of user autonomy and data privacy, potentially leading to misuse of personal information. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the core principles of secure application development and data handling. This involves anticipating potential risks, even for seemingly straightforward applications. A thorough risk assessment, followed by the implementation of layered security measures and adherence to data privacy best practices, should be paramount. When developing open social applications, developers must consider the potential for data exposure and the importance of user trust, ensuring that their development process is guided by a commitment to security and ethical data stewardship, regardless of the specific regulatory landscape of the exam. Question 20. System analysis indicates that a developer is tasked with creating an open social application that will access and display user profile information from multiple social networks. The project has a very aggressive timeline. Which of the following represents the most professionally responsible approach to ensure the application's security and user data protection? Option A. Prioritize meeting the aggressive deadline by implementing only the most basic security features explicitly outlined in the OpenSocial API documentation. Option B. Conduct thorough security testing, including vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, to identify and address potential weaknesses before deployment, even if it requires a slight adjustment to the timeline. Option C. Skip comprehensive security testing to ensure the application is delivered on time, relying on the platform's inherent security measures. Option D. Assume that the OpenSocial platform provider is solely responsible for all security aspects of the application and user data. The correct answer is B. Conduct thorough security testing, including vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, to identify and address potential weaknesses before deployment, even if it requires a slight adjustment to the timeline. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the technical demands of developing an open social application with the implicit need to adhere to best practices for user data handling and application security, even when not explicitly mandated by a specific, granular regulation for this niche technology. The developer must anticipate potential vulnerabilities and privacy concerns inherent in integrating with various platforms through open social APIs. Careful judgment is required to proactively implement robust security measures and privacy controls, rather than waiting for a breach or a specific regulatory violation to occur. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive, security-first mindset in application development. By conducting thorough security testing, including vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, the developer ensures that the application is resilient against common attack vectors and protects user data from unauthorized access. This aligns with the general principles of data protection and application integrity, which are foundational to ethical software development and maintaining user trust. While C2040-415 focuses on developing open social applications, the underlying principles of secure coding and data privacy are universally applicable and expected of professionals in the field. An incorrect approach that involves skipping comprehensive security testing to meet a tight deadline is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a significant ethical lapse, as it knowingly exposes users and the platform to potential security risks. It violates the implicit professional obligation to deliver secure and reliable software. Furthermore, depending on the specific open social platform and its terms of service, such negligence could lead to contractual breaches and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which is to only implement security measures that are explicitly mentioned in the OpenSocial API documentation, is also professionally flawed. While API documentation provides essential guidance, it is rarely exhaustive. Relying solely on it ignores the broader landscape of cybersecurity threats and best practices. This narrow focus can lead to overlooking critical vulnerabilities that are not specific to the API itself, but rather to the application's architecture or implementation. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to anticipate potential risks beyond the immediate scope of the API. A third incorrect approach, which is to assume that the OpenSocial platform provider handles all security concerns, is a dangerous misconception. Application developers have a shared responsibility for security. The platform provider secures the infrastructure, but the application developer is responsible for the security of the application's code, data handling, and user authentication mechanisms. Abdicating this responsibility can lead to severe security breaches that originate within the application itself, with significant consequences for all parties involved. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk-based approach. Developers should first identify potential security and privacy risks associated with the application's functionality and data interactions. Then, they should prioritize mitigation strategies based on the severity and likelihood of these risks. This includes implementing secure coding practices, conducting regular security testing, and staying informed about emerging threats and best practices in application security and data privacy, even when specific regulations are not explicitly detailed for the technology in question.